something was off the second I walked into that steakhouse. Not because of the way my father looked at me, like a man about to deliver a eulogy, but because Lauren was already there, swirling a glass of wine like she owned the place. She was never early, never composed, never anything but a walking train wreck of failed startups and influencer-tier narcissism, yet tonight, she looked settled, smug like she'd already won. The waiter barely had time to pour my drink before my father leaned forward and dropped the hammer. "I'm retiring," he said, voice steady, calculated. "Lauren will be taking over as CEO." For a second, I just stared at him, not in shock. I stopped expecting fairness from this man a long time ago, but because I wanted to see it, the moment he flinched. The crack in his perfect, untouchable armor when he realized what he'd just done. It never came. "You're talented," he continued, as if that meant anything, as if I hadn't just spent 3 months pulling his failing empire out of the grave. But leadership, true leadership, takes something more. Lauren took a slow sip of her wine, letting the silence drag before finally looking at me. "You should be proud, though," she said, Fox sympathy dripping from every syllable. "I mean, Dad's right. Not everyone is cut out to lead." That's when he slid the envelope across the table. $2,000, he said, "for your time," and that's when I smiled. Not because I was okay with it. Not because I was about to roll over and let them pat themselves on the back for outmaneuvering me. No, I smiled because they thought they'd won. I pocketed the cash without a word, picked up my drink and toasted them. Let them think I'd accepted my fate. Let them enjoy their little victory. Then I went to work. By morning, everything would change. I didn't go home that night. I didn't sulk, didn't rage, didn't even call the few board members I knew were loyal to me. That would have been predictable. That's what they expected. Me licking my wounds, maybe throwing a tantrum before slinking away like a beaten dog. Instead, I went to my office, the one I'd earned. The one I'd built back into relevance while I sat in his corner office pretending the industry hadn't changed. The security guard gave me a nod, no questions asked. He knew who had been running the company these past 3 months. Everyone did. Everyone except my father. I poured myself a drink and made one call, just one. "Is the offer still on the table?" I asked. The man on the other end didn't hesitate. "For you, always." We met in the early hours in the kind of place where people with too much money discuss things that never make it into headlines. I didn't need to explain the situation. He already knew. News in our industry traveled fast, especially when it reeked of betrayal. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his chair. "He handed you a check, patted you on the head, and told you to be a good boy." "Close," I said. "Cash to grand." He laughed, deep and genuine. "Christ, that's almost insulting." "It's not almost. It is insulting." He eyed me for a long moment. "Then what do you want?" And that was the real question, wasn't it? I could walk away, let my father burn his own company to the ground under Lauren's incompetent hands. Or I could take what should have been mine. I chose the latter. "I want control," I said. "I want all of it." A slow smile spread across his face. "Then let's make it happen." By the time I left, the wheels were already in motion. The calls were being made. The right people were being nudged, pressured, bought. By the time my father and Lauren walked into the office the next morning, they didn't know it yet, but they were already finished. By the time I arrived at the office the next morning, the air was already different. The front desk receptionist, who usually greeted me with a hesitant good morning, under my father's shadow stood a little straighter. The employees I passed weren't making their usual forced small talk. They were watching. Waiting. They felt it, the shift. But my father and Lauren, they still thought they were on top of the world. I stepped into the boardroom just as they were settling in, my father at the head of the table. Lauren smugly adjusting the new CEO nameplate in front of her. She had her phone in hand, probably about to post some empty corporate girl boss garbage about breaking barriers, while running a company she had no business leading. Then she saw me, and for the first time, that self-satisfied smirk faltered. "What the hell are you doing here?" she snapped. I pulled out a chair, took my time adjusting my cuffs and met her glare with an easy smile, taking what's mine, before she could respond. The door opened again, and that's when my father's expression finally cracked. The man who walked in was someone my father never wanted to see across a negotiation table, let alone in his own boardroom, my silent partner, the one I'd met the night before. James Lancaster, the biggest private equity shark in the industry, a man who didn't just buy out companies, He swallowed them, stripped them for parts, and rebuilt them in his image. My father went pale as he knew. Finally he knew. The boardroom filled quickly after that, investors, board members, some looking confused, others looking like they'd been expecting this, because they had. I leaned back, waiting, watching as the last few stragglers took their seats. Then I pulled out a folder, slid it across the table to my father, and spoke in the same calm, measured tone he had used on me last night. There's been a change in leadership. Lauren grabbed the folder first, flipping it open with the same arrogance she'd had at dinner. Then she saw it, the signatures, the terms, the finalized buyout. She gasped, shooting up from her chair. "This is a joke." "No," I said. "This is business." My father's hands clenched into fists as he skimmed the papers. He knew contracts better than anyone. Knew exactly what he was looking at, a hostile takeover. I had partnered with Lancaster, used my connections, my leverage, and, most importantly, the investors' doubts about Lauren's ability to lead. I let them know what would happen to their money under her rule. Let them see, in clear, brutal financial projections, how fast she'd run the empire into the ground. And then, when they were already second-guessing everything, Lancaster made them an offer. A way out, a way forward. All they had to do was sign, and they had, one by one, until the company was mine. I folded my hands on the table. "You taught me well, Dad," I said, my voice calm. "Even told me leadership takes something more." "You were right." His face was unreadable. Then he exhaled, slow, measured, and closed the folder with a sharp snap. "So," he said, his voice like gravel. "What happens now?" I smiled. "Now," I said, standing. "You're both fired." A silence. Thick, suffocating, the kind that only happens when power shifts hands in real time. The boardroom, once my father's kingdom, was now my arena. Lauren made the first move, because of course she did. She shoved back her chair so hard it scraped against the floor, her face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do this," she spat, jabbing a manicured finger at me. "Dad, say something." But my father just sat there, fingers steepled. His jaw locked tight, not because he didn't want to fight, but because he knew it was over. I turned to her, voice calm, almost amused. "I can," and I did. Lauren's gaze snapped to the board members. "You," she pointed at one, then another, then another. "You all back this. You let him pull this stunt, after everything I was promised." The board didn't say a word. Because they had backed it. They had seen what I had done in 3 months versus what she would do in a lifetime. She turned back to my father, desperation creeping in now. "Dad, fix this." Still, he didn't speak. And that's when I saw it, the flicker of something in his eyes. Not just anger, not just loss, realization. For the first time in his life, my father was not in control, and he hated it. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "You thought I was a worker," I said, slow, deliberate. "You thought I'd always be in the trenches while you sat up here playing king." I gestured to the room, the polished mahogany table, the skyline view, the empire I had just taken. "You were wrong." Finally, my father exhaled, slow and sharp. Then he stood, adjusted his cuffs. When he finally looked at me, it wasn't as his son, it was as his successor. "You think this is a victory?" he said, voice edged with something dark. "But you'll learn. One day you'll learn." I just smiled. "Maybe, but today isn't that day." Lauren let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "You're gonna regret this," she hissed, eyes flashing. "Doubt it," I said. Then I motioned to security, to men already waiting by the door. They scored them out. Lauren shouted something. Something shrill, something ugly, but I didn't hear it. I didn't need to, because at that moment, as the doors swung open and my father and sister were let out of the company I had rebuilt, I had already won, but the game, it wasn't over yet. The moment the doors shut behind them, the room exhaled. Conversations that had been held hostage by tension burst into murmurs, low and cautious. The board members exchanged glances, processing the coup they had just witnessed. Some looked relieved. Others wary, and Lancaster, he just smirked, the kind of grin that came from watching a student finally surpass his teacher. "You handled that well," he said, breaking the silence. "But now comes the real fight." I knew what he meant. Taking the company had been one thing, holding it, that was an entirely different war. I sat back down, fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood. "Lauren's already scrambling to play the victim," I said. "By lunch she'll have sob stories flooding the press. And my father." I exhaled, watching the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "He won't go down quietly." "No, he won't." Lancaster agreed. He built to many alliances, to many people who owe him favors. He leaned in slightly. You need to cut off his influence before he rallies. I already had a plan for that. Contracts, I said, every key supplier, every major partner. We renegotiate today, make it clear that this is the new order, and any allegiance to my father is dead weight. Lancaster nodded. And the workforce, I glanced at the senior executives, the ones who had remained quiet through all of this, still assessing where their loyalties should lie. Mandatory re-signing of all upper management contracts, I said, loyalty clause included. You want a seat at the table. You sign the paperwork. One of the board members hesitated. That's a drastic move. I met his gaze, unwavering. Drastic is what keeps empires from collapsing. The meeting ended swiftly after that. The board understood what was at stake. Either they moved forward under my leadership, or they risked sinking with my father's outdated ways. But as I left the boardroom, my phone buzzed. A private number. I answered, no words at first, just silence. Then, you really think you can do this without me? My father's voice, low, measured. Deadly. I stepped into my office, shut the door, and leaned against the desk. I don't think, I said, calm as ever. I know. He let out a slow, humorless chuckle. You may have the company, but you don't have the respect. I have something better. I countered, control. A pause, then something colder. You think you won, boy, he murmured. You haven't even seen the battlefield yet. Click, the line went dead. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly. He wasn't bluffing. My father had spent decades building this empire, and I had just ripped it from his hands. He wouldn't sit back and let it happen. No. He'd fight, and I had to be ready. The war had officially begun. By noon, my father's counterattack was already in motion. Calls went out. Alliances were tested. Some of our oldest partners, suppliers, logistics firms, even a few key investors, suddenly grew hesitant. Contracts that should have been signed without question were under review. But the worst part, he wasn't coming for me directly. He was coming for my people. I was in the middle of renegotiating a refinery deal when my assistant, Jenna, burst into my office, phone in hand, face pale. It's bad, she said, breathless. Your father. He's offering buyouts. I stiffened. Who? All your senior staff, she said, the ones who supported you during the turnaround. He's offering them double their salaries to walk. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just a power move. This was a message. He wanted me to feel it, to watch the foundation I'd built crumble from the inside. Jenna hesitated, and that's not all. I exhaled slowly. Go on. He's telling people you rigged the takeover, that Lancaster forced the board's hand, that you backstabbed your own family. She swallowed hard. He's making you look like a corporate tyrant. I let out a slow, humorless chuckle. That's rich coming from him. Jenna's phone buzzed again. Another name added to the list of people my father was trying to poach. I knew this tactic. Divide and weaken. If enough people lost faith in me, if enough power players switched sides, the company would spiral. I had two choices. I could play defense, try to hold on to every last person my father was targeting, reassure them, promise stability. Or I could do what he never saw coming. I stood adjusting my sleeves. Get Lancaster on the phone. Jenna blinked. What are you? If my father wants a bidding war, he'll get one. My voice was steady. But we're not fighting on his terms. Within an hour, I was in a conference call with Lancaster and a few other key players. We're countering his offers, I said, leaning forward. But not with money. Lancaster raised an eyebrow. Then with what? I smiled. Equity. Silence. Then a slow chuckle from Lancaster. Bold, he admitted. Risky. It's not risk, I corrected. It's buy. And my father could throw cash around all he wanted. But at the end of the day, people follow ownership. They follow the future. I wasn't just offering my executives a paycheck. I was offering them a stake in the empire. And just like that, the tide shifted. One by one, my father's targets came back with a simple answer: no deal. And that's when I got the call. Private number. I answered, already knowing who it was. You arrogant little, my father started. But I cut him off, losing control. Old man. My voice was calm, but I wanted him to feel it. The tables turning, the pressure mounting. A pause. Then his voice dropped. You're making enemies you can't afford to keep. I smirked. So are you. Click. This was no longer just a takeover. This was a reckoning. The next move had to be mine. I knew my father too well. He wasn't the type to accept defeat if he couldn't win through leverage or loyalty. He'd burn everything down just to keep me from holding it. So, I played the final card I'd been keeping close. I called an emergency meeting with my new leadership team, executives who had turned down my father's bribes, board members who had backed me, and Lancaster, who had a vested interest in seeing this through. "We're going public," I announced the moment everyone was seated. The room stilled. Lancaster, for the first time, actually looked surprised. "That's a nuclear option." Exactly, my father had built this company like an empire. One where he sat at the top, where control was absolute, but empires were fragile. They relied on the illusion of power, on the idea that one man could dictate everything. Taking the company public would rip that illusion apart. It would turn my father from an undisputed ruler into just another shareholder. His voice would be drowned out by a sea of investors, by market forces, by me. Lauren, for all her smugness, had never understood business enough to see it coming, but my father, he would know, he would feel it. Lancaster exhaled, then gave a small nod. "You're serious about this?" Completely. The next 24 hours were a blur of legal teams, negotiations, press strategies. We moved fast, faster than my father could react. By the time he caught wind of what was happening, the papers were already being filed, and that's when the real fight began. My father stormed into my office the next morning. No invitation, no warning. Security had tried to stop him, but no one was ready to lay hands on the man who had built this company. I barely looked up from my desk. "Should I call security, or are you here to congratulate me?" He slammed a thick stack of documents onto my desk. "You think I'll let you take my company public?" His voice was low, furious. I leaned back, keeping my expression unreadable. "It's not your company anymore." His eyes burned into mine. "You have no idea what you're doing." I stood slowly, deliberately. "No, you had no idea what you were doing when you underestimated me." For the first time I saw it in his face, not just anger, fear, because he knew it was over. His legacy wasn't just being taken from him, it was being rewritten by me. The papers would be finalized within days. The stock would hit the market, and by the time the dust settled, he'd be nothing more than a name in the history books. The moment my father realized he had lost, something inside him shifted. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, but his eyes, those sharp, ruthless eyes that had built an empire, were hollow. He didn't shout, didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the documents he had slammed onto my desk and flipped to a specific page. "This is what you missed," he muttered, sliding it toward me. I glanced down. A contract. An old one, buried in the foundation of the company, hidden under decades of bureaucracy. A clause that, if interpreted a certain way, could delay the public offering for months, long enough for him to rally support, long enough to strike back. I looked up. He was watching me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I smiled and pulled out my phone. One button press, one call. A moment later, the door opened. Jenna stepped inside, handing me a fresh stack of documents. I slid them across the desk, right over his. "I anticipated this," I said, tapping the top page. "So I had the legal team restructure the offer last night. That clause, it's irrelevant now." My father's fingers curled around the edges of the contract. His last play, his last shred of control, gone. For the first time, I saw it. The full weight of what had happened settling on his shoulders. The empire he had built, the name he had turned into power, was no longer his. It was mine. He let out a slow breath, nodding slightly, almost impressed. Then, without another word, he stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out. Lauren didn't even show up that day. She had lost too much, too fast. She wasn't built for a war like this. By the end of the week, the paperwork was finalized. The company went public. The stock soared, and my father, he faded into the background, retired, left the city. Occasionally, his name popped up in interviews, always with the same bitter sentiment, that his son had stolen what was rightfully his. But the truth, he had given it away, not the company, not the title. The moment he dismissed me, the moment he handed me $2,000 and told me I wasn't a leader, that was the moment he lost. Because from that second forward, I wasn't working for him anymore. I was working for me, and I never lose.